Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Dane Mizutani of the Pioneer Press, as we continue our series, What Happened to That Guy? And we move to Marcus Davenport, edge rusher for the Minnesota Vikings, that was signed to a $13 million contract in the offseason and ended up playing just 118 snaps with 2 sacks and a handful of pressures. Dane, during training camp, you could have convinced me that Marcus Davenport was en route to a double-digit sack season. He was a guy going back to New Orleans that had struggled to stay on the field and had struggled with consistency throughout his career, but the high end had always been very, very high from Davenport. He was graded throughout the years extremely well by PFF, had good pressure numbers, and we saw why with training camp. But then they get to the end of camp and he gets injured and never was able to get going as part of this Minnesota Vikings defense.
Yeah, and I think this is a classic case of trying to win on the margins, trying to buy the dip, which I am in favor of. Like, if you can buy low on a guy and hope that he hits, um, it works out great sometimes. But you can't continue to do this. You can't bet on guys who have been injured throughout their career to just not be injured. And I think we saw it this year with Davenport. It was like he signed at this low contract late in free age or right around in free agency because I think people thought, well, he was injured last year. Is he going to be able to play a full season? You get him at a discount, I guess, relative to other pass rushers, in that area. But the discount doesn't matter because he plays 4 games, but he actually only played 2 games because he didn't play he played 4 snaps in week 2 against the Eagles. And then he got hurt, I think, early in the game against the Bears. So I think he was designed to fit in this defense with Brian Flores opposite of Danielle Hunter. And I think at the peak of his powers, it really could have worked because, like you mentioned, Marcus Davenport does have a skill set that makes him a good pass rusher in the NFL. He's someone who can, you were hearing Brian Flores talk about, we'll be able to rush this guy off the edge. We'll be able to move him around and rush him up the middle. If we want to go up the A gap with Marcus Davenport, we can do it. If we want to go through the B gap with Marcus Davenport, we can do it. And pairing someone with that's so versatile in how they rush with Danielle Hunter sounds really, really good in theory. And I think when you look at the season that DJ Wanham had, it might have been really, really good in practice too with Davenport if he could stay on the field. But throughout his career, he struggled with injuries. And that was just the case this year as well. Like you mentioned, he gets injured late in training camp or right before the regular season practices start. And the fact that he had made it through training camp without an injury, I think all of us were like, wow, maybe this will work. This could work. And then the injury pops up before week 1. And then he's not playing in week 1. And then he tries to give it a go in week 2 and it doesn't work. So you shut him down. And then he gets on the field and you see he can be a productive player. He finishes with 2 sacks in basically 2 games. But his availability just was not there. And because of that, you can just look back on this signing as another example of trying to hit with injury prone players. I guess the injury prone label I don't love, but he is injury prone. It is something that has hampered him throughout his career. Trying to hit with those players and hope that you can win on the margins that way, not a good recipe.
I understand why the Vikings did that. They were limited in their amount of cap space. They needed a partner for Danielle Hunter. And when you go back to 2021, Davenport had an 88.8 out of 100 PFF grade. He was one of the better edge rushers in the league in 2021 and then struggled in 2022, which is why he ended up as a free agent. And he wasn't old, he was 27. So there was an idea that you could pick him up. If it ends up clicking, you could end up getting a total steal on Marcus Davenport. You'd be able to re-sign him and make him a long-term partner for Danielle Hunter or a replacement for Danielle Hunter if he ultimately leaves in free agency. The high end of that move was you get a very good above average to star level player, which is what Davenport had been at his peak. But the injury at the end of training camp and then trying to come back against Philadelphia, that was really detrimental to them in that game specifically because they had game planned assuming that they were going to have Davenport, and then they had to shuffle. That's when the Eagles ran all over them that day, and they couldn't change the game plan on the fly. But the upside of Davenport we saw against Carolina and against Kansas City when he got sacks and multiple pressures in those games. There were a handful of times against Carolina where they moved him around and he put a spin move on a guy. He went right past someone. There's very few players in the NFL that are his size, around 270 pounds, 6'4", 6'5", with the type of speed and quickness that he possesses. There was a reason why he was a first round draft pick. And then just as it seemed like he was getting going, it was kind of a bad break. I mean, you're talking about injury prone, but someone ends up hitting his leg, and then we never see him again after the game in Chicago. And I also wonder about either the recovery process for him, considering all the injuries that he's had, or how hard he wanted to push it to come back, knowing that he would be a free agent. And if he got hurt again, that could hurt his potential free agency going forward. And now with Marcus Davenport, assuming that the Vikings are not going to give him a contract extension, I don't know why they would. He's going to be a $6.8 million dead cap hit. So there are consequences, even when you take a sort of a swing at a player, a buy low with a high ceiling, that there is a downside to it, which is the Vikings end up getting hurt on the cap next season.
Yeah, there's just no way they're going to bring him back. I don't know how you could watch this and do that. So yeah, you're going to have to live with that $6.8 million for a guy who gave you 2 games of production 1 year and is not on your team in the year that he's costing you $6.8 million against your cap. I think the point about, he gets injured in week, I don't even know, it might have been week 6, week 7 against the Bears, and you never see him again. He had the tightrope surgery on his ankle, which is supposed to, I guess, in some cases, expedite your recovery. I think of someone like Brock Bowers, who had the tightrope surgery, the tight end at Georgia, and he was back on the field in 3 weeks. I know it's not the same. I know it's not one equals another. So just because Brock Bowers was able to come back in 3 weeks doesn't mean Marcus Davenport should be able to come back in 3 weeks. But I think he should have been able to come back at some point. So I wonder what happened with the recovery process. I don't love questioning guys or like us kind of sitting here and being like, does this guy really want to play? Like, does he care about football? So I don't know if I'll go there, but I think it is the point about it gets late enough in the season. You probably yourself know I've struggled with injuries. If it happens again, am I marketable by March? I think that probably had to cross his mind. Is it a will to play football? Is it I don't love this game? I don't know. But I think planning for my future, it probably, there was something there. There had to be. Because you see a lot of guys suffer high ankle sprains. You don't see them miss 4 months with them. So I think it probably got to a point. It was pretty clear that this thing with the Vikings wasn't going in a direction that would end in a Super Bowl run. That was clear to everybody. So why push it? Why risk re-injuring an ankle? Why risk injuring something else, maybe more severe than a high ankle sprain, when you don't have a contract come March 15th, when you're going to be available again? So I gotta think that played a role in him not coming back in any capacity, because I just don't know if I've seen a high ankle sprain with that surgery take someone out for as long as it took Davenport out for.
Right. It was week 6 that he got hurt. And it's very difficult from an outside perspective to talk about player injuries and recovery and so forth. And it's delicate ground. And so you don't know what's going on with that person's body, and everybody's different. But Kevin O'Connell did mention at one point that he believed that Marcus Davenport should be on track to return. And then we never got a single hint of that, bringing him off IR. And they were in dire straits with that
Mm-hmm.
position, playing DJ Wanham almost every single snap, and then trying to fill in with Patrick Jones, who struggled in that role. So they could have used him down the stretch, and he wasn't able to return. So it ends up being a pretty big bust signing for the Vikings because of those injuries. And as you mentioned, a lesson for going forward, that as the Vikings consider how they're going to rebuild their defense, that signings are not always safer than draft picks or any other way of going about it, because they can have their own pitfalls, including the player's injury history. And Marcus Davenport had not played over 500 snaps since 2019. So if their expectation was that he was going to, wait, did I have that right? Yeah, 2019. So if their expectation was that he was going to play 750 snaps, then they probably set the bar too high and they ultimately get burned on Marcus Davenport. That's another episode of What Happened to That Guy. And we will have two more in our series coming up. Matthew Coller, Dane Mizutani. We'll catch you next time.